Here's what's coming up on The World Today. Finland and Sweden move a step closer to NATO membership, sign accession protocols. Supporters outline principles for Ukraine's recovery, plus 22-year-old arrested after 4th of July mass shooting in the United States. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. We begin with some updates from day 132 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Ukrainian police say Russian forces have struck a market in the city of Slovyansk in eastern Ukraine, killing a woman and injuring at least 3 other people. Smoke billowed from an auto supplies shop and flames engulfed rows of market stores as firefighters tried to extinguish the blaze. Police say it's not clear how many people were at the market at the time of the attack, but that the market had been in the process of closing for the day, with some stores still trading. Representatives from more than 40 countries and international organizations have signed the Lugano Declaration at a 2-day conference in Switzerland, highlighting a series of principles to steer Ukraine's recovery. Signatories, including the United States, Britain, France and Japan, condemned Russia's military aggression in the strongest terms and urged Moscow to withdraw its troops without delay.
What we have achieved over the last 2 days lays the groundwork that will, in the long term, allow for more than just the reconstruction of a battered country's infrastructure and the restoration of its people's livelihoods. Our work prepares for the time after the war, even as the war is still raging. This should give the people in Ukraine hope and the certainty that they are not alone, because Ukraine's sustainable recovery requires revival, resilience and renewed institutions fit for the future.
We should wait finish of war actions and then begin this fast recovery. And third stage, I hope and I believe it will begin not later than in 1 year after finish of the war, so after fast recovery, it will be global recovery, it will be Ukrainian integration into the EU, it will be recovery of our economy according to the principle Build Back Better. We will use this regional principle and absolutely use principle of European Union and civilized countries.
This process, but I think we need much more decisive steps from our Western partners to unblock the Black Sea. Okay. Thank you. It's difficult to tell the very exact numbers because the structure of the economy has changed substantially. But anyway, it's between 30 and 40%. Obviously, we can continue to basically to live further. Obviously, the level of income for the people, the quality of life in Ukraine has substantially decreased, but the basic living can be ensured. But again, it's really critical to get this 5 billion per month, because otherwise, within a month or two, it will be really difficult to keep the whole system in balance. But anyway, we should really work out these mechanisms, because this is not what is.
Member states of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, have signed off on the accession protocols for Finland and Sweden, days after Turkey lifted its objections against the historic Nordic expansion. The move paves the way for what is expected to be a lengthy ratification process, which must be unanimous among the alliance's 13 members. The next step will be the approval of the 2 countries' memberships in the legislative institutions. Sweden and Finland, countries, they both had adopted a neutral stance towards Russia for most of their recent history, but they say the invasion of Ukraine propelled them to take a new direction.
For Finland, for Sweden, for NATO, and for Euro-Atlantic security. President Putin tried to close NATO's door. We now demonstrate that NATO's door remains open. I commend all allies for moving so quickly in accepting Finland and Sweden's applications for membership. And I want to thank Turkey, Finland and Sweden for their constructive approach. The trilateral agreement they signed at the Madrid summit made today possible. I know all three parties are working hard on the implementation and robust follow-through, especially in the fight against terrorism.
I really hope for a quick ratification process, and as you know, we made a memorandum of understanding between Finland, Sweden and Turkey to address the concern of Turkey when it comes to security and terrorism. And we will honor that memorandum and follow up on that, and we will also have a joint mechanism. So I hope that the three countries, Sweden, Finland and Turkey, could see that this is a good memorandum that leads to that the Turkish parliament also feel that they can ratify our agreement. And all the requests for extradition will go the normal way in our legislation, and it's finally the High Court who take the decisions. And this has happened during the last years, and it will continue to happen this year, but we will of course have more cooperation to get information and so on, but there will be no other ways, other legal ways than what we have already.
In this document and in this memorandum, we have actually addressed all those concerns that also Turkey had raised, including the terrorism, the PKK issue and so forth, and all those steps that are necessary to be taken are mentioned in the memorandum. So I'm very much thinking that based on that cooperation that we agreed, we can go forward and also hopefully please the concerns of Turkey at this moment.
This concludes this.
Security analyst Chidi Nwanu joins us now for more on this move by Finland and Sweden. Chidi, thank you so much for joining us on the programme.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
So as Finland and Sweden get closer to NATO membership, what are the implications, especially regarding European security and for NATO itself?
So I think the ascension of, or the potential ascension of Sweden and Finland into NATO, it has several key strategic kind of outcomes that will be detrimental to Russia per se, but also will change the security architecture in Europe in of itself. So Finland has an extremely long border with Russia, and Finland is the most interesting one. Not only does it have a very long border with Russia, but also it has a history of fighting Russia. I mean, the whole concept of Finlandization, kind of holding a neutral stance towards Russia, comes from the Winter War of 1940, in which followed almost the same trajectory as the Ukrainian war, in which the Finns initially defeated the Russians, fought them to a standstill, and then the Russians, using their superior men and material, crushed the Finns and forced them into a peace deal. The Finns counterattacked with the Nazis, with the Germans, and took back their territory. And obviously, at the end of the Second World War, they were on the losing side. This led to the Russians obviously understood that Finland is not an easy country to beat, but also understood that managed to dictate terms to them. Now, changing that dynamic now shows first and foremost how European leaders have strategically made the decision that that a point of no return has been reached with Russia. And from a practical point of view, what it brings is a very, very well-trained, well-equipped, two very well-trained, well-equipped militaries into NATO, increases Russia's total border length with NATO, exponentially, and this increases the military problems for Russia, because however it wants to, if it does want to get into an active conflict with NATO, it now has to factor in fighting in the Baltics, fighting in the north, for which it doesn't have the assets, especially as it's fully committed in Ukraine. From a European perspective, what it does mean is that the European powers now have two very capable allies, on board, two really good military-industrial complexes that are also able to bring a lot of, technology and a lot of skills. We've seen the British-Swedish NLAW being used extensively in Ukraine. So it gives them a lot more options.
Anthony, how do you expect Moscow to react to this as they move closer?
Well, Moscow's reaction has been predictable, between threats and, pretending that they don't care. It's, the same kind of reaction that you'd expect ostensibly. the important thing here is that whilst the Russian Federation will definitely be anti this move, they don't have that many options. They do not have, if they do want an overt military kind of response, they don't have those resources. Everything that they have is tied up in Ukraine, and whatever they're not using in Ukraine has to be held in reserve in case the war escalates, and also to replace their losses. If they want to try, the normal active measures, cyber attacks, sabotage, all of that kind of stuff, it's been done before. As we could see from Ukraine, they tried to use that as part of their offensive in February, and it didn't work. It didn't work because everybody knows this is now how Moscow fights. So everybody's ready for it. They're ready for the cyber attacks. They're ready for the sabotage, for the social media campaigns, for the propaganda. So there aren't that many options, but that, so saying, it doesn't mean that Moscow would not try something. They will try economic warfare, as they've been fighting with Europe, limiting gas supplies. That's already started. And there will also be a few cyber attacks. But right now, they don't have that many options. So it's just about rattling the cage and making people aware that, yes, we're still here and we're still able to do something if we wanted to.
And speaking of Ukraine and NATO, some analysts and even leaders like South Africa's president have blamed NATO's expansion for the war in Ukraine. Did NATO provoke Russia? What do you think?
So, my opinion, no. That's to me, that's unambiguous. This was a unilateral war that was started by, I wouldn't even say it was started by Russia. It was started more or less by one person, by Vladimir Putin, and maybe a few people around him who decided they wanted this war. But if we are going to put that into context, the actions of the Western powers and the actions of, even narrowing it down to NATO is a little bit too specific. The actions of the Western powers, the US, etc., have done things that have made Russia not fear for its safety, but have made it wary. So we can go back as far as the intervention in Kosovo, which the Russians opposed, but most importantly, they were unable to do anything to stop. Again, the intervention in Libya only a few years ago, the Russians, not only did they oppose it, they specifically asked the Americans for guarantees that they wouldn't overthrow Gaddafi, and the Americans did overthrow Gaddafi, or rather, Gaddafi was overthrown with American support. And these humiliations have made Russia want to, lash back, want to hit back. And, the first thing they did, obviously, was a influence operation against the American election in 2016. And now that Russia feels they have the military strength and a good target, they've decided, or President Putin has decided, this is his opportunity. To say that NATO provoked this, I think, is a complete misreading of the situation. But you can also not say that there weren't actions undertaken by Western nations that have caused Russia to be maybe provoked or to be pushed into a situation where they thought that this is a viable option for them.
Well, Chidi, looking at NATO's role, we know it played a critical role in stabilising Europe after World War II, preventing great power conflict and overcoming Cold War divisions after 1989. But 3 decades after the Cold War, has it outlived its relevance?
Up until February 24th, I would have said yes. But the Russians have just proved that, such an organization is necessary. Once the Cold War fell, the reason for NATO to exist really wasn't there. And if we're going to, and this is kind of, it's an interesting question because it shows the two sides of the argument. NATO didn't need to exist after the Berlin Wall fell. The big enemy, the big threat from the East was no longer there. But by it remaining, what it did do was it helped stabilize Eastern and Central Europe. It helped, promote democracy. The two tools that the Western powers used to prevent Eastern and Western and Central Europe from falling into despotism or major hubs of crime like Moldova or Belarus was the EU and NATO. By forcing part of the NATO rules are that militaries must be under civilian control. So by forcing politicians to control their military, to discipline their military, to have professional militaries, you prevented, having rogue militaries running around Europe. It also allowed European powers, Western European powers, to demilitarize. So Western powers have been steadily demilitarizing since the 1990s to the point now where they most likely couldn't fight a war if they wanted to. And this is why, the whole narrative about NATO provoking Russia, I find it laughable because most European countries, I speak as a British Army reservist, we couldn't fight Russia if we wanted to. And we are one of the better equipped militaries in Western Europe. So it allowed Europe to demilitarize. And considering Europe has spent most of the past centuries fighting each other and dragging the rest of the world into their wars, that was a positive thing. Unfortunately, now we're in a world where Europe has to remilitarize, and a remilitarized Europe, particularly a remilitarized Germany, is not a good thing. So hopefully we can find a way where this war is resolved without Europe going back to it having multiple strong militaries facing off against each other. But that is one of the unintended consequences of this conflict.
All right, then, and just before I let you go, the invasion has been going on for over 4 months now. What's your assessment, and how long more can this go on for?
Okay, so to the latter question, I don't know. I think it's a war. It will go on for as long as, until, to be brutally honest, until the old men at the top are tired of young men dying. As to the state of the war, the Russians are very, very clearly, and have been clearly winning for quite a while. After the loss of the Battle of Kiev, they really very quickly reset their forces, brought them back in and fought the war that they could fight, which was a very slow attritional war using lots of firepower, trying to isolate the enemy and then destroy them with just pure firepower rather than any type of fancy maneuvers. You can see the few times that they did try, what we would call fancy maneuvers, combined arms operations, river crossings and all of that kind of stuff. They got smashed. What they have done is just steadily use artillery to destroy the Ukrainians, force them to withdraw, and then follow up with their tanks, and then follow up with their infantry, and that has worked for them. However, that's been very costly to both sides, to both the Ukrainians and the Russians. And how long the Russians can sustain this, we've got to remember that Russia has not mobilized its forces. And whilst everyone talks about Russia having this huge army, it's not a huge, well-trained and well-equipped army. It's just a big army. And to bring them up to the skill level that you'd need to fight this kind of war will take a long time. So Russia has used a lot of manpower to get what it's got now, used a lot of resources. And how long it can sustain that is debatable. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, still have a lot of manpower, but they've lost a lot of their country, a lot of equipment, and their men are quite tired. Their economy is destroyed. So unfortunately, there is no appetite on either side, because both sides can see the other side's weaknesses as well as their own weaknesses and their own strengths. So as I said, this war will continue until either a decision is reached, as in a serious portion of either militaries is destroyed, or there is some other pressure that is brought on either both sides to negotiate, and that doesn't seem likely.
All right, then, security analyst, thank you so much for your thought on the program, Chidinwanu.
Thank you.
Now, a new set of economic measures aimed at supporting the Russian military has passed the first vote in the State Duma, Russia's lower house of parliament. There are still several rounds of parliamentary procedure to go, but if the measures are adopted, legal entities in Russia will not be able to refuse contracts with the Russian armed forces. Although Russian officials continue to call the war in Ukraine a special military operation, the new measures would effectively mean the country is reshaping its industry in support of the ongoing invasion, placing the country on a war economy footing. In a statement, Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Borisov noted the enormous sanction pressure from the West. The economic measures will still need to undergo second and third readings at the State Duma, reviewed by the upper house of parliament, and be signed by President Vladimir Putin to become law. In other developments, a Russian-flagged cargo ship at the center of a fight over grain between Kyiv and Moscow has remained anchored off Turkey's Black Sea coast 4 days after its unexpected arrival. Ukraine alleges that the Zhibek-Zholi vessel had set off from its Kremlin-occupied port of Berdyansk after picking up illegally seized wheat. Ukraine's ambassador to Turkey says Kyiv had presented evidence to authorities in Ankara and that an investigation is underway. Moscow concedes that the 7,000-ton vessel was sailing under the Russian flag, but denies any wrongdoing. Still ahead on The World Today. Drought emergency declared in northern Italy. More details, please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. In the United States, police have arrested a suspect after 6 people were killed in a mass shooting at an Independence Day parade in Highland Park, Chicago. According to officials, 22-year-old Robert E. Crimo III was detained after a brief chase. The gunman climbed onto a roof, shooting randomly at spectators using a high-powered rifle. It's the latest mass shooting to hit the United States. There's been one in every week of 2022.
America's latest mass shooting in the Chicago suburb of Highland Park turned a cherished July 4th parade from a scene of patriotic joy into one of fear and death. The rapid burst of a high-powered rifle brought the chilling reality that no one can be sure they're safe anywhere to one of the nation's most unifying gatherings. 6 people were killed and 24 taken to hospital.
I was just scared. I was scared for my daughter, who is 6 years old. I didn't know what was going on. You know, we just heard gunshots and people running and screaming all over the place. Chairs, I remember chairs and everything was on the floor. I remember grabbing her and running with her, telling her, come on, let's go, baby, we gotta run, we gotta run. We gotta get, somewhere safe.
The suspect, 22-year-old Robert E. Crimo, was detained after a brief chase. The shooting comes with gun violence fresh on the minds of many Americans after a massacre on May the 24th in which 19 school children and 2 teachers were killed at an elementary school in Texas, and the May 14 attack which killed 10 people at a grocery store in New York.
I'm furious. I'm furious that yet more innocent lives were taken by gun violence. I'm furious that their loved ones are forever broken by what took place today. I'm furious that children and their families have been traumatized. I'm furious that this is happening in communities all across Illinois and America. I'm furious because it does not have to be this way. And yet we as a nation, well, we continue to allow this to happen. While we celebrate the 4th of July just once a year, mass shootings have become our weekly, yes, weekly, American tradition.
And the President of the United States, Joe Biden, please.
At a 4th of July event, President Joe Biden vowed to keep fighting the epidemic of gun violence in the country and held a moment of silence for the victims.
6 people have passed and others are wounded, but we got a lot more work to do. We got to get this under control. We got to get this under control. But having said that, I just wanted to keep just a slight moment of silence for all those families.
Last week, the president signed the first significant federal bill on gun safety in nearly 30 years. It imposes tougher checks on young buyers and encourages states to remove guns from people considered a threat. But critics say the measures don't go far enough.
Meanwhile, just hours after the shooting in Chicago, in Philadelphia, 2 policemen were also shot near the site of a 4th of July concert. Both of the police officers impacted in the shooting were released from hospital. One suffered a graze wound to their forehead and the other police officer was struck in the arm. The police officers were shot near the Benjamin Franklin Parkway as thousands of people celebrated a 4th of July concert. And fireworks show with the crowd scattering in panic when shots were fired. Philadelphia's mayor has expressed frustration with gun laws in the U.S. following the shooting.
Subject that we were looking for, the person of interest, Robert Crimo III, was spotted by a North Chicago unit at Buckley and 41, his vehicle, the vehicle that we were looking for. He attempted to initiate a traffic stop on that subject. That subject did flee. A brief pursuit went on. Ultimately, they were able to get the subject stopped at Wesley and 41 in Lake Forest. The subject was taken into custody without incident. So at this point, I, again, want to reiterate, things are moving very quickly, as they do, unfortunately. And we just want to keep you updated with the most relevant information. The person of interest is now being taken to the Highland Park Police Department, where we're going to begin the next phase of the investigation and speak with this person to make sure or see if, in fact, he is connected to this incident.
And that was the update of the shooting in Chicago and not the one in Philadelphia. Well, our Washington correspondent, Maria Birch, joins us now for more on the situation in the United States. Maria, another week, another mass shooting. This time on a day when Americans were meant to be celebrating the 4th of July. What's the mood like in the country?
Well, unfortunately, as it was stated during your briefing earlier, is that this has become almost a weekly occurrence. Unfortunately, Americans are definitely heartbroken by it, but not surprised. Many Americans are cautious about going to large gatherings, events, parades. At first it was COVID, but obviously these mass shootings are creating much hesitance. People are trying to get back out, trying to do things as communities and as families, but clearly these mass shootings are putting a damper to the ability to celebrate and to be together as one. And so a day that was meant for a celebration of freedom, and freedom meaning so much to many Americans, just depending on where you sit in the framework of freedom. And so yesterday was a day about celebrating freedom, and many people's freedoms were taken away at the hands of gun violence.
And Maria, the shooting that happened in Chicago resulted in the death of 6 people, unfortunately. Do we know the identities of the victims yet?
There have been a few that have been released. One woman who was a teacher within a synagogue, her information was released, and so they are obviously, the family and the entire community around that synagogue are mourning her passing. And so you're beginning to see little by little the individuals' identities being released. But I would say that most likely toward the end of today, early tomorrow, we'll definitely have additional information on that.
And we know several people were also injured. Give us an update on their condition of those who were taken to hospital.
Most individuals who were injured have been now released from the hospital. There are some obviously with more critical injuries, but the majority of those who were taken to the hospital have now been released and are obviously probably the emotional trauma in some ways could be greater than some of the physical trauma they might have experienced.
And what more do we know about the suspect and, other information regarding investigations and the motive of the suspect?
Yes, well, they did notice some of his social media tweets and information did lend to potentially what we saw happen. And so obviously, it's really about how do we ensure that we are able to address issues before they reach to this point. And I don't think that the American government, and specifically the police forces, and even from a federal level, have been able to really find ways to identify how to have these individuals obviously either monitored or apprehended before such occurrences like this occur.
And to the shooting that happened in Philadelphia, where 2 police officers were injured, do we know anything regarding the suspect in that shooting yet?
Well, that suspect was able to be apprehended after a short traffic violation stop, as I know you had mentioned earlier. And so there will definitely be more information. But, mental illness is one of the major challenges. And the question is whether or not police departments will begin to do mental health evaluations on these individuals as they're apprehended before they even go to trial, because there needs to be additional information, and many activists are asking for additional information on what are the signs, what are some of the mental health challenges that many of these individuals are experiencing that we can then use to be able to ensure or to try to prevent future situations.
And the president, last week he signed the first significant federal bill on gun safety in nearly 30 years. Speak to us about that. How significant is this in curbing gun violence in the country?
This is very significant as it relates to curbing gun violence. The challenge, though, is that we're still seeing mass shootings occur. One of the questions and one of the calls is for the president to do more, put executive orders in place to put a ban on guns at this time. With the number of mass shootings that have occurred, why are we still even allowed to have guns? Why are guns even still being sold at the rate they're being sold? Why are military weaponry actually being able to be purchased? And so the measures were a first step in the process, but I think many are still questioning why we're not taking more drastic measures until we can get our hands around how to truly manage gun control laws and really manage the purchasing and ownership of guns in America.
All right, then, Maria, thanks a lot for the update. And to other stories now, activists and migrants have gathered in the border town of Tijuana in northern Mexico to demand justice for 53 migrants killed in a truck in San Antonio, Texas. Chanting "No more deaths" and lighting candles, the activists and migrants honored those who lost their lives crossing the border, hoping for a better life. The truck carrying migrants from Mexico, Guatemala and El Salvador was discovered abandoned last week in a desolate industrial area near a highway on the outskirts of San Antonio, Texas. The temperatures in the area that day had soared as high as 39.4 degrees Celsius, and authorities called to the scene and found no water supplies or signs of working air conditioning inside the cargo trailer.
We want to create awareness what is going on. How can we celebrate Independence Days when our people are being trapped in an environment of hate, an environment of fear, and dying trying to cross the border, serving up to 10 years for inhumane sentences such as illegal reentry.
And to other stories, about 50,000 people have been urged to evacuate their homes as floods hit Australia's largest city for the third time this year. Parts of Sydney have received about 8 months of rain in 4 days. Roads have been cut off, some houses are underwater, and thousands have been left without power.
Around 500,000 people across New South Wales, most in Sydney's west, were ordered to leave their homes this week after rivers swiftly rose past danger levels. New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet warned people to stay alert.
This event is far from over. Please don't be complacent. Wherever you are, please be careful when you're driving on our roads. Obviously, there is still substantial risk for flash flooding across our state. And once again, as we always say, please don't drive through floodwaters.
The federal government declared the floods a natural disaster, helping flood-hit residents receive emergency funding support, and the risk of flooding could remain through the week.
So we're really asking communities today to bear with us, keep working with us. It has been a difficult 4 days. There's no gilding that lily. We're not quite through it yet. We've got major flooding heights still on a number of river systems.
Flooding in Australia's most populous state has become the new normal. Several places in New South Wales have received more than the country's annual average rainfall in 4 days.
Absolutely devastated. It's really hard. So we don't know. We're just doing one day at a time, getting through it. We've got a lot of family that have come and helping. So that's really good. We've got grandkids that are helping. So we'll get through it. We moved into this property about 2.5 years ago. Yeah, and we loved it up until the floods. And we got 4 floods in a few months.
Among the most vulnerable in need of rescue are animals. On Tuesday, horses and cows swam with water up to their necks in search of higher ground in Sydney's outskirts.
Obviously got to get them out now, so it's happened. It's happened overnight, and yeah, got to get them out.
Experts say more preventive measures as well as research are needed to understand how Australia's weather events are tied to climate change.
Global warming increases the amount of moisture in the atmosphere, but also it tends to shift the weather patterns as well. So there is a scenario which we need to consider that over the long term, there could be drought over Eastern Australia, but there are years where we have extreme wet events, such as what's going on right now.
Widespread flooding across Australia has killed more than 20 people this year, many in South Wales. The country has been exposed to the La Nina weather phenomenon in the Pacific Ocean 2 years in a row, which typically brings above average rainfall on the east coast.
In Europe, Italy has declared a state of emergency in 5 northern regions surrounding the Po River amid the worst drought in 70 years. According to officials, the drought threatens more than 30% of Italy's agricultural produce. Several regions have already announced water rationing. Unusually hot weather and low rainfall across winter and spring have compounded water shortages in northern Italy and heightened fears about the effects of climate change. Prime Minister Mario Draghi says climate change is without doubt linked to Sunday's glacier collapse in the Dolomites, where 7 people died and 13 other people are missing. Meanwhile, rescue teams have resumed the search for the 13 climbers still missing almost 2 days after part of a glacier gave way, killing 7 people. Hikers in northern Italy say they were frightened after the glacier collapsed over the weekend, killing at least 7 people in a tragedy experts linked to rising temperatures.
Actually, yeah, we are a bit scared because this glacier falling is not something that we were aware of. It's not something that happened before, and it's quite a new danger, and we don't know exactly how safe is the situation now. I don't think it is. So, and by respect for the people who are still there, we don't feel to go at all. Yeah.
Right now, after what happened, I feel a bit scared because about 2 days close, we were about to walk just near the glacier, so it could have happened to us. So we were planning to go near the glacier, but right now we're gonna do another way to avoid it. So yeah, it's really scared because there are a lot of people who are dying. So.
Do you think? I don't know what circumstances should be up. People said that it's very warm, so the temperature is not normal, that it should be lower. So probably climate changes made this. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, certainly I think the risks are elevated in my mind, so I have to take that into consideration when I'm planning my routes. But I don't think I would say I'm scared to stop my trip or not continue my journey. And no, I don't think this is normal. It feels like I've never heard of something like this happening, especially in the summertime in July, especially in this region. So it's definitely a surprise to me.
There's still to come on the programme. 1 million set to perform Hajj in Saudi Arabia as COVID-19 restrictions ease. For details in a moment, please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Glaciers in Europe's Alps are becoming more unstable and dangerous as rising temperatures linked to climate change are reawakening what were long seen as dormant, almost fossilized sheets of ice. Italy has been baking in an early summer heat wave, and attention has been focused on the impacts of drought on crops on the fertile Po Valley.
Also because I know very well that glacier, I was really surprised because
until yesterday, if you would have asked me to think about a risky glacier, for sure, I would not have cited the Marmolada one, because the Marmolada glacier is relatively at a low elevation, so it is heavily impacted by ice melting and retreats. And so usually it was considered by glaciologists as a sort of typical receding and almost disappearing glacier, where everything and every glaciological process was going to end, to finish in these years. And so it was really sudden surprise to see that this kind of glacier, so heavily impacted by climate change, has reacted in such an unpredictable and deep way, I mean. And probably the temperatures are so high and so persistent that many glaciers located below the elevations at which the 0 degrees temperature is found, which is always higher and higher, well, those glaciers are really weakening their structure also in some ways that are very difficult to predict, because if the processes are occurring inside the glacier, it is hard, almost impossible to predict where this kind of collapses can happen until the very last moment, and maybe it's too late.
In South Africa, consumers and business owners are feeling the heat of rolling power blackouts. Homes and organisations have been left without electricity for more than 9 hours daily and risking long-term economic harm to the country.
To the impact that it's having on South Africa and the economy, obviously it's a massive inconvenience to millions of people. But more than that, it does very significant economic damage, at every level, from small business through to commerce, industry, agriculture, mining, transportation. Every sector of the economy is affected by electricity shortages. The economy is unable to grow because of the constraints of electricity supply, and very important foreign domestic investment as well as local investment is inhibited and placed on hold and sometimes walks away.
And over in Benin Republic, some residents are switching from wheat to plantain flour as prices rise in the country. For small plantain flour business owners, production has almost doubled since the start of the war in Ukraine. With wheat flour becoming hard to find and expensive, some people see the cooking banana as a viable alternative.
Josiane Hodonu's small plantain flour business has almost doubled its production since the start of the war in Ukraine. With wheat flour becoming hard to find, some people see the cooking banana as a viable alternative. Walking through a plantain field just outside of Porto Novo in Benin, Hodonu is choosing the right fruits for her next batch of flour, each plantain branch costing from $2.30 to $11, depending on the number of bananas per branch. Once she finds everything that she needs, she heads back to her workshop to start the process. Hodonu began producing plantain flour back in 2018 at a very small scale, but lately her production has nearly doubled.
Before the war in Ukraine, I produced at least 80 kilograms per month, but now, because of the war in Ukraine, which caused the price of wheat to increase and made it hard to find in the market, I produce up to 150 kilograms per month when the market is on.
West Africa is facing its worst food crisis on record, driven by Islamist insurgencies that have forced millions of people off their land in Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and Nigeria. The region has also seen worsening floods and droughts linked to global warming. The war has disrupted shipping in the Black Sea, a major artery for grains and other commodities, throttling exports from Russia and Ukraine to markets including Africa. Today, Hodonu believes plantain is the way forward.
Generally, we use wheat, which is not local. It's not from here. Now that there is crisis in Ukraine, wheat flour is becoming hard to find in markets, and it's also expensive. But we have bananas, plantains at our disposal. We can produce it. So that's why plantain flour has value.
Donc là, la farine de banane a sa valeur là.
The start was a bit tedious for Hodonu. She was only able to produce 20 kilograms of flour per month because she had to dry the plantain in the sun. Now using a hydrator, she's able to produce more at a faster pace.
And in Britain, a former top Foreign Office official has accused Boris Johnson's office of lying over whether the British Prime Minister knew about earlier complaints of sexual misconduct made against a minister who resigned over his behaviour last week. The allegation piles pressure on Prime Minister Johnson over what he knew when he appointed Christopher Pincher to a role involved in enforcing discipline and offering pastoral care in the governing party. Many of the Prime Minister's lawmakers are increasingly frustrated at defending what some say is a scandal-ridden administration and could renew attempts to try to unseat the Prime Minister just a month after he survived a confidence vote.
But no formal disciplinary action was taken and no formal process to initiate disciplinary action was taken. And that was the view of the Civil Service and the Cabinet Office Propriety and Ethics team.
Program in Saudi Arabia, where after a 2-year absence, international pilgrims will perform the yearly Hajj pilgrimage in the country for the first time starting Wednesday, after previously being restricted amid the kingdom's battle to curb the coronavirus pandemic. Some 1 million people are expected to be in attendance in the holy city of Mecca for the start of the 5-day ritual, a large jump from last year when only 60,000 people were permitted. In 2020, during the height of the pandemic's early waves and before vaccines were available, about 10,000 were selected. Many Muslims around the world have been worried about attending a mass gathering of people while the pandemic continues and infections are rising in some countries. The Saudi government eased several COVID-19 restrictions last month, including mask mandates. And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shabuale. Bye for now.